Thanks, Jess. It's interesting to be here in this way. I want to welcome all of you to this community conversation on intended and unintended, or intended and unexpected, troubling consequences in Changemaker education. My name is Melanie Panitch. I'm Executive Director of the Office of Social Innovation at Ryerson University in downtown Toronto, Canada. Ryerson has the distinction of being the first Ashoka Changemaker University in Canada. And I heard from Eric Lee yesterday in his presentation on the Stanford Social Innovation Review that proportionately Canada has more universities and colleges as Changemaker U's than the US does. I didn't know that, so that was a little takeaway for me. Like everyone else, we are in pandemic lockdown with the small amusement, I suppose, of being able to peek into one another's workspace backgrounds. Mine looks a bit cluttered this morning, I can see. I came to social innovation through the disability rights movement. I was founding director of the School of Disability Studies at Ryerson and learned a great deal about social innovation through creating institutional space for disability studies in the academy. My teaching is in the minor in social innovation, and I'll just start by saying at the Office of Social Innovation at Ryerson, we define social innovation, recognizing it has many definitions, but we define it as the practice of using creative and collaborative approaches to challenge historical and existing systems of exclusion in order to have a transformative impact on society and the environment. As the conference went online to respond to this pandemic restriction of physical gathering, it's been necessary to rework our proposal somewhat, and I certainly noticed that yesterday in the sessions I was in. Suddenly, what we were anticipating about social changes right smack dab in front of us. And that involves, I suppose, some adjustment to the issue I wanted to raise today. However, I think there's still a valuable discussion to be had. So I want to make a few points to kick off the conversation. But what I was imagining and have been imagining is a round table of people meeting over lunch, and I gathered, because this issue is of relevance, wanting to very much to hear from the voices of those around the virtual table, knowing that we're here because we want to be connected to a network of other change makers. So here's the fruits for our discussion today. We know that as educators in change making, that we want to be responsive to student needs and the broader landscape of social issues. We're thoughtful about systems and design and systems thinking in order to strive to create equitable and safe spaces. So this session is pivoted on cross-university partnerships and student exchange programs as we design and think about, or have thought about, student opportunities globally. It was sparked by two recent experiences that we had that were somewhat expected, chaotic, and challenging experiences. One was a situation that involved a cohort of students stuck in a record-breaking monsoon in southern India, where the work had to shift from conducting research to providing on-the-ground relief. And secondly, another experience was one that was centered on teamwork and collective impact that needed to be revised once students landed in another country and encountered different understandings of social justice. So we all have those moments. We plan meticulously, have the best intentions, recruit the most capable students that we can find, and somehow in the midst of the program, things go awry. So this conversation is about that moment. How do we handle the unexpected? How do we hold ourselves accountable as educators? And just a few other words about that. So often in exchange programs, in the exchange program, in my experience, there's been a lot of focus on the celebratory nature of change-making education, what we can do, what we can accomplish, a certain positioning of success. And I have found it rare to find honest and transparent discussions on the parts of our work that go awry, that critically reflect on the sort of underbelly, the shadowy notions of international partnerships and programs. So I think it's imperative for us to recognize that even with the best of planning, there are unintended and unexpected consequences. And of course, we just need to look around us on this very day and this month to see what we're talking about. But things do go to wrong, and it brings into view the impact of these consequences on our students and community members. And so this challenges somewhat the culture of failing fast, failing hard, failing forward, which originated in the entrepreneurship community as a way to motivate, the iterative developmental process. But it does raise questions of an ethical nature when it involves real people for whom we're responsible. And so in submitting this topic for our discussion today, the hope is to converse with people who are involved in global learning, or indeed in programming generally, to think about the risks involved in Changemaker education so we can begin to plan for them. So I know that I have colleagues on this call, in this session, and I see some interested faces. I very much welcome hearing from you in the true spirit of a community conversation. Related experiences or lessons learned that could be shared in this context. Jessica or Jess Lax, how do we proceed with this? Can people?
So what we can do, folks, is we can try breaking up into smaller groups. Maybe we'll try that, Melanie, and see if that can kind of jumpstart the conversation. Unless anyone else has an insight that they want to, or an experience or story that they want to share with the group. JC, maybe you can talk a little bit about something that might have happened on your campus.
Yeah, I apologize for the morning voice too. It's very early in San Diego right now, but especially with pandemic times, it's so much harder to get up. But anyway, I appreciated I wanted to make it to this one because I think it's a topic that has been in my mind for a long time as we really try to spark so many of the different mindsets in our Changemaker students or people interested in this topic. And there's a fine balance between how hard we push them to like be fearless and like not be afraid of failure, but also balancing that out with the idea that many communities and many people, many students themselves don't have the privilege to be able to fail as many times as we tell them to do so, right? And when we teach them collaboration, it doesn't only mean with each other, but it actually means co-creation with the community. And often what I find is that what's the biggest challenge in the process is that we have to tear down some paradigms that we've been building this on for such a long time. So even I was in a session yesterday where they talked about the importance of language and stepping away from some of the words that we used in the past to be able to embrace this now. It takes a long time. So it's we've seen it on campus, especially on campuses where if kids come maybe from more affluent backgrounds, it's a lot easier for them to imagine that yes, failure is an option. Well, yeah, because maybe failure for you has meant something very different than for other people that now you're interacting with, right? And so I think it takes some, not only, this is not really on the students, but it's on us, and on administrators and faculty, and even methods like design thinking that I love. Often we need to just make sure or be very mindful of the words and language that we use in order for us to convey a message that ultimately helps the students co-create, see themselves equal or much less knowledgeable than the community, because they are the ones actually facing the challenges. So all these power imbalances and whatnot often I think come from just understanding the student's background, understanding our own paradigms and language that we use.
Mm.
That's what came up for me as you were sharing.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have an experience that they'd like to share?
I have one, and I still have no idea how we should have solved it. I don't even remember how we solved it, actually. It was several years ago. But we had set up a project within the university for the students to tackle as their innovation project. And several of them objected to paying us for doing something that we should be paying them to do. If anybody has advice, I'd appreciate it if that comes again.
I don't have any advice, but I'm actually co-teaching a class this quarter where we are going to be having the students look at an innovative solution to a problem on campus. So I wonder if we're going, that's maybe a good warning that we need to look out for something like that. I guess it's a little different. They're supposed to choose a topic that they're interested in, like, you know, climate change or the environment or student mental health. And then they're supposed to come up with some sort of an innovative solution to a problem on campus related to that topic. So I don't know if that was a little bit different from what you had the students do in your situation.
Yes, I think what you're talking about is things maybe that they'll be experiencing, so they might not see it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
I think one of the experiences or the takeaways for us was the importance of co-creating with students what it is that we're moving forward with. I think the relationship had been one where we would recruit students and engage them in the idea of the project or the exchange, but hadn't evolved the curriculum with them. And so moving forward, what we would do differently, I think, would be to engage students who had had direct experience with this to kind of consult with us on developing the curriculum and the program. So what we might see as what would be the best approach would be fine-tuned, to say the least, and made more relevant by students. So it's interesting because you know that and you think you're doing it, and there's really there's many more ways and a deeper way of doing it. I know I'm being sort of general here, but I think the principle around involving students in as much of the process in the program as possible.
I would like to add something. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Olivia from Upaya, Puebla, Mexico. And since we began with our relation with Ashoka, I remember I was like really concerned about the way I realized that the Changemaker is the term that we use now, but in the past we were using social entrepreneurs. And I remember that I could realize that they are really lonely people. It was a concern because they get so passionate about the problem, they get in love with the problem, and they are working completely to solve it. So sometimes they leave some other things out of their lives. I had the opportunity to be in Chile in a real big congress, and I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of them. And there was like a constant, they didn't have a family, they didn't have emotional support with people who loved them. And it was scary for me. I was thinking that that's an unexpected problem that we should be aware of, and we have to give them a comprehensive education, so they won't leave that things that feed the soul of the person out of the education programs. I don't know if I gave me understood, if you you could understand what I was meaning because of my English, sorry.
You did. To your point, Olivia, I think you do bring up something very, very important, which is what else are we beyond the mindsets of being a social entrepreneur, a social innovator, a change maker. What else are we teaching them, and how are we teaching them to do the care for the self? I enjoyed that yesterday. One of the another session was talking not about soft skills but essential skills, and I actually made a note of that, because for often I feel like in my classes we talk about how I have my students work a lot on the self, right? And a lot of reflection, a lot of just understanding yourself before you go out there. And like you're not going to do any work in any community until you do some work here on our campus. So like most of the projects that we have, at least to the hub, have been campus developed. I mean, projects developed for the campus to understand your immediate community. If you become a change of agent within your immediate community, which is the campus, then you can actually believe that you understand what collaboration looks like and everything else in order to co-create with the community at large. And a big element of that is the idea of self-reflection and taking care of yourself, or understanding yourself, in order for you to not try and heal some past traumas or just some of the stuff that we all carry on and project it onto the community, but rather you take care of that yourself and with your own network before you actually use the community to try and process some of this stuff. And I'm sorry to hold the mic for too long. So like one of the, your comment, Olivia, reminded me, the research that I did for my dissertation was interviewing Ashoka fellows, which were like 19 of them. And one of the commonalities, the idea was to understand how do they make meaning of the world and how do they process the world, because we all may have similar experiences, but we don't all end up being Ashoka fellows, right? So how is it that they are processing the world? And one of the things that came up as a theme for all of them was that they have a way of processing and making meaning through reflecting on their experiences daily, right? And so they all talked about a reflective practice, whether it was journaling, running, many of them talked about yoga, meditation, and so forth. And they talked about the importance of all of those elements, or just a reflective practice, for them to understand better how to do the work that they feel called to do without depleting their emotional resources, or without losing a lot of their relationships and so forth. And many of them had gone through the process of like losing relationships, losing the network, and just being like the Lone Ranger at the front. And then after understanding that, they kind of work through some of that process. So that's what your comment reminded me of. The pitfall of ended up alone or just lonely in that process.
Yeah.
I'm just dropping two things in the chat. One is a primer on responsible changemaker education that we wrote at Ashoka U, and self-awareness is kind of the key tenet that we started with, which builds on what JC was saying, but also looks at how do we think about our own biases and implicit ones that we are carrying into each interaction. And then the second thing I'll drop in is Ashoka is a partner of something called the Wellbeing Project. And it came out of an effort of understanding that a lot of people who work in social change, work with very hard things, and or social entrepreneurs are putting at many other parts of their lives at stake to do the work that they are doing. So it's a whole project looking at how does inner well-being inspire outer doing. I'm not getting that line correctly, but I think you all get the main idea, and they have a whole stream of their work that works with higher education and how can we put well-being into the social change education that is being delivered. So I'll drop that link in there for folks who are interested.
Thank you. And I'm thinking something else. Sometimes they don't lose their relationships. They really build their families around them. But sometimes as they go, like how can I say this? They go in the opposite interest of some groups. They go against the interest of some groups. Sometimes they get threatened because they are bothering people with power. So that's another thing we have to think about, say, the safety of the person and the family and the group. Did I make me understood?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And I think it is not only well-being, but having a safe space and a safe life, because sometimes they are going to be threatened because they are going against power. Mm-hmm.
And I guess a critical part of Changemaker education would be to recognize the power dimension, and that change really has politics at its core, which doesn't always come clear. But in giving students a sense of agency, it's sometimes challenging to, I guess, encourage them to see that they can take action in their lives where they are, where they live, where they work. I mean, you were mentioning on campus as a good place to start, because many will say, well, when I get promoted to this position, or when I get more education, or when I have more experience, I'll feel more confident about speaking up. And the balance between launching out to do a project before you understand all the implications had me this year in my course having students do a blueprint for change rather than leaping out to do it, so that we could talk about the dimensions of it before, in the interest of do no harm. So there is learning, and these moments that go awry can happen in a class, they can happen in a project, they can happen in an international experience. But I guess knowing when it's time to stop and revisit or reevaluate, where to talk about the sort of unexpected consequences would be also a key point of pausing and reflection.
Yes, maybe lighting those possible unexpected consequences. It can come if they really map. They have a very good mapping of the system and the relationships and the kind of actors that they might find around the system that they are trying to,
That's right.
to change.
We're engaged in a project right now called Map the System, where students do a research inquiry into a compelling social issue, that environmental or societal, where they are walking through a very detailed process of mapping what the landscape looks like, what the barriers are, what the levers for change are. And we've just this very week had to move our community celebration and presentations to an online competition, which is not really a competition, but it is an online presentation. So we've been very much engaged in that. But it is exactly what you're saying, Olivia, to try and have a detailed understanding of what it is that students are going to be engaged in if they actually want to proceed to be change makers in an effective way. How do they understand the systems and the interlocking systems that they're going to encounter?
Does anybody else who hasn't had a chance to speak yet want to share any insights they're taking away from this conversation or any other elements?
Well, I'd certainly like to meet all of you again next year when we can sit around a table and kind of pick this apart. But I do think acknowledging some of the the obstacles that we run into is mutually a supportive way of understanding how challenging some of this work is, even as we do it and as we teach it. I don't know whether international exchanges are going to be happening in the not too distant future. There's a lot that's being reimagined, rethought, redone, but certainly the need for innovation, social change. We're seeing what radical change looks like as governments have responded to the dramatically shifting landscape of the economy and health. And if anything, it sort of shows that change can happen. And hopefully that, as I was hearing a number of times iterated yesterday, we can't go back to the way things were before. And how do we make sure that that's the case in the areas where we have some spheres of influence and levers of change.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Melanie, for hosting this conversation and for everyone jumping on. I hope you enjoy the rest of all the sessions that are lined up today, and I hope I'll cross paths with you in another virtual room very soon. So take care, everybody. And thank you again, Melanie, for this wonderful conversation.
It's very empowering to have the technology at your fingertips. So I feel great. Thanks for the opportunity. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.